Gordon Woodruff stood in his kitchen, watching his wife Victoria fumble with her dead phone, frustration creasing her features. They'd been married 8 years, and he'd learned to read her moods like weather patterns. Lately, those patterns had shifted, subtle changes he'd attributed to stress from her job at Clearview Insurance. She was a claims adjuster, often dealing with difficult cases that followed her home. "Can I use yours?" Victoria asked, holding up her lifeless phone. "I need to call Kathy. It's about Mom's birthday dinner." Gordon handed over his phone without hesitation. Kathy Kendall was Victoria's sister, and they spoke often enough that the request seemed ordinary. Victoria stepped into the living room, her voice dropping to that particular pitch she used for family conversations, warm but businesslike. Gordon returned his attention to the grant proposal spread across the kitchen counter. As a senior researcher at Meridian Pharmaceuticals, he'd spent the last 3 years developing a novel treatment for degenerative nerve conditions. The formula represented a potential breakthrough, and the company had invested millions in his work. The proposal would secure funding for the next phase of trials. Everything he'd worked toward was finally materializing. A ping cut through his concentration. Victoria's phone had flickered back to life on the counter, its screen illuminating with a notification. Gordon glanced toward the living room. Victoria was still talking, her back to him. The message preview glowed on the lock screen. "Pay by Friday, or I send everything to your husband." Gordon's hand froze halfway to his coffee cup. The message was from a number saved simply as D. He stared at the screen until it darkened, his mind cycling through explanations. A scam? Unlikely with that specific phrasing. A joke from a friend? The tone was too threatening. His chest tightened as the most obvious answer surfaced, the one he wanted to dismiss but couldn't. Victoria's voice drifted from the living room, casual and light, as she discussed restaurant options with Kathy. Gordon picked up his phone, still in her hand from across the room, and scrolled through his own messages, bank accounts, anything that might explain the threat. Nothing. Whatever everything referred to, it was Victoria's secret, not his. When Victoria returned, her phone was dark again. She handed Gordon's phone back with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Thanks. Kathy says Rosselli's at 7 on Saturday." "Sounds good," Gordon said, keeping his voice neutral. He watched her gather her dead phone and charger, disappearing upstairs without meeting his gaze. That night, Gordon lay awake beside his sleeping wife, listening to her steady breathing and wondering who she'd become. He'd noticed the deleted texts weeks ago, glimpses of her phone screen showing messaging apps with no conversation history, as if she'd been wiping everything clean. He'd convinced himself it was nothing, that he was being paranoid. But paranoia didn't send blackmail threats. By morning, Gordon had made his decision. He wouldn't confront Victoria, not yet. Instead, he'd investigate. If there was nothing to hide, he'd discover that and apologize for doubting her. If there was something, well, he needed to know what he was dealing with before taking action. Gordon's opportunity came Tuesday afternoon when Victoria mentioned a work dinner that would keep her out until late. He waited until her car disappeared around the corner, then went to her home office. Victoria kept meticulous records, everything filed and labeled with the precision that made her excellent at her job. Gordon started with the obvious places: desk drawers, filing cabinets, finding nothing unusual. Insurance documents, birthday cards from her mother, old tax returns. Her laptop was password protected, but Gordon knew Victoria's patterns. She used variations of the same password across multiple accounts, rotating through family birthdays and anniversaries. After 3 attempts, he was in. The email account showed nothing suspicious in the inbox, but the deleted folder told a different story. Victoria had been corresponding with someone named Arnold Dalton. The name triggered recognition. Dalton was a senior executive at Vanguard Biosolutions, one of Meridian's primary competitors. Gordon's pulse quickened as he read through the recovered messages. The early emails were professional, discussing industry trends and regulatory changes. Then they shifted, becoming personal. Compliments about Victoria's insights. Invitations to coffee that became invitations to lunch. By 3 months ago, the tone had changed completely. The messages were intimate, filled with the kind of inside jokes and pet names that Gordon had thought were reserved for their marriage. Gordon sat back, his hands trembling slightly. An affair. The word felt surreal even as evidence mounted on the screen before him. But the blackmail message suggested something beyond infidelity. He kept reading, searching for what D might be threatening to expose. He found it in an email from 2 weeks ago. Arnold had written, "The formula specifications you sent are exactly what we needed. Once we file our own patent application, Meridian won't know what hit them. Your husband's work will make us both very rich, darling." Gordon read the sentence 3 times, each word cutting deeper. Victoria hadn't just betrayed their marriage, she'd betrayed his life's work. The formula he'd spent years developing, the research that could help thousands of patients, she'd handed it to a competitor like it was nothing. And for what? Money? A new life with Arnold Dalton? He forced himself to keep reading, documenting everything. There were file transfers, timestamps showing when Victoria had accessed his home computer and copied encrypted research files. She'd been patient and thorough, collecting data over months. The final email from Arnold, dated 5 days ago, confirmed they'd successfully reconstructed Gordon's formula and were preparing to rush it through their own patent process. Gordon copied everything to an encrypted drive, then carefully cleared his browsing history and returned Victoria's laptop to exactly how he'd found it. His hands were steady now, his initial shock crystallizing into something colder and more focused. Victoria came home at 9:30, her cheeks flushed from wine and whatever lies she'd told her colleagues about her marriage. Gordon was in the living room, reading a journal article on his tablet, playing the role of the oblivious husband. "How was dinner?" he asked. "Exhausting." Janet from underwriting wouldn't stop talking about her divorce. Victoria kicked off her heels and collapsed onto the couch beside him. "How was your evening?" "Productive. I made progress on the grant proposal." Victoria smiled, and Gordon wondered how he'd missed the falseness in it before. "That's great, honey. I'm proud of you." The words tasted like ash in his mouth, but he nodded and returned to his article. Victoria scrolled through her phone, the same phone that had revealed her betrayal, and Gordon caught her deleting messages in real time, her fingers moving with practiced efficiency. "Who's D?" Gordon asked casually, not looking up from his tablet. Victoria's fingers froze. The silence stretched for 3 heartbeats before she recovered. "What? You mentioned someone named D at work once. I was just curious." "Oh." Victoria's laugh sounded forced. "Probably Diane from accounting." "What?" "No reason. Just making conversation." But Gordon had his answer in her reaction. D wasn't Diane from accounting. D was someone Victoria feared, someone who had power over her. The blackmailer. Over the next 2 days, Gordon became a ghost in his own life. He went to work, attended meetings, reviewed data with his research team, all while his mind worked the problem like an equation to be solved. He needed to identify D, understand what leverage they held, and determine exactly how deep this conspiracy ran. The answer came from an unexpected source. Raphael Robbins, Gordon's closest friend and a fellow researcher at Meridian, stopped by his office Wednesday afternoon with coffee and concern etched on his face. "You look like hell," Raphael said, setting a cup on Gordon's desk. "What's going on?" Gordon considered deflecting, then decided he needed an ally. He closed his office door and told Raphael everything. The blackmail message, the emails, Victoria's theft of his research. Raphael listened without interruption, his expression darkening with each revelation. "Arnold Dalton," Raphael said when Gordon finished. "I know him. Ruthless bastard. He tried to poach me 2 years ago, offered twice my salary if I'd bring Meridian's research data with me. You never mentioned that." "Because I told him to go to hell." Raphael leaned forward. "Gordon, if Vanguard files a patent on your formula, even if we can prove they stole it, the legal battle will take years. Meridian will probably shelve the project rather than fight. Your work will disappear." Gordon had reached the same conclusion. "I need to find D. Whoever's blackmailing Victoria knows about the theft. They might have evidence that could help me." Raphael pulled out his phone, scrolling through contacts. "I know someone who might help. Daryl Reeves. He's a private investigator who does work for pharmaceutical companies. Handles corporate espionage cases, intellectual property theft, that kind of thing. If someone's been watching Victoria and Dalton, he'd know how to find them." Gordon hesitated. Involving a third party meant expanding the circle of people who knew about his humiliation. But he was out of options. Set up a meeting. By Thursday evening, Gordon was sitting across from Daryl Reeves in a coffee shop 3 towns over from where he lived. Reeves was in his 50s, with the weathered face of someone who'd seen too much human ugliness to be surprised by anything. He listened to Gordon's story with professional detachment, occasionally making notes on a small pad. "The blackmail message," Reeves said when Gordon finished. "You said it came from a number saved as D?" "Yes." Reeves smiled, and something predatory flickered in his expression. "That's me. D for Daryl." Gordon felt the world tilt. "You're blackmailing my wife." "I prefer to think of it as leveraging information for mutual benefit." Reeves set down his coffee. 3 weeks ago, Vanguard Biosolutions hired me to conduct due diligence on a new formula they were planning to patent. They wanted to make sure there were no legal complications before filing. When I started digging, I discovered the formula was identical to research being conducted at Meridian Pharmaceuticals. By you. So you know they stole it. I know your wife stole it and gave it to Arnold Dalton. I have photos of them together, copies of the file she transferred, everything. Reeves pulled out his phone and showed Gordon a series of images. Victoria and Arnold at restaurants, entering hotel rooms, exchanging USB drives in parking lots. Each photo was time-stamped and geotagged. I presented my findings to Vanguard's legal team. They immediately killed the patent application and fired Dalton for exposing them to liability. Gordon processed this information, trying to understand the angle. If Vanguard fired Dalton, why are you still blackmailing Victoria? Because Dalton wasn't my only client. Reeves leaned back, his expression calculating. After Vanguard cut ties, Dalton approached me privately. He wanted to buy my evidence, bury it so it couldn't be used against him in any future legal action. He offered me $50,000. And I told him I'd think about it. Then I approached your wife and gave her the same offer. Pay me $50,000 by Friday, or I send everything to you. Reeves smiled. I figured I'd see who could come up with the money first, then sell to the highest bidder. No offense, Dr. Woodruff, but this is business. Gordon stared at the man across from him, disgust and calculation warring in his mind. Daryl Reeves was a mercenary, willing to sell his evidence to whoever paid the most. But he was also sitting in front of Gordon, explaining his scheme instead of simply taking Dalton's money and disappearing. "Why tell me this?" Gordon asked. "Because Raphael Robbins called in a favor, and I owe him several. Also because I did some additional research on you, Dr. Woodruff, and I think you might be interested in a different arrangement." Reeves slid a folder across the table. "Arnold Dalton didn't just seduce your wife and steal your research. He's done this before. Twice. Different women, different companies, same playbook. He's currently unemployed and desperate. Your wife is also desperate. She can't come up with $50,000 without you noticing, which is why she hasn't paid me." Gordon opened the folder, finding detailed dossiers on Dalton's previous schemes. In each case, he'd targeted the wife or girlfriend of a researcher, used the relationship to steal proprietary information, then disappeared when the theft was discovered. The women were left to face the consequences while Dalton moved on to his next mark. "What arrangement do you have in mind?" Gordon asked. Reeves's smile widened. "I give you all my evidence, the photos, the file transfers, everything. You use it however you want. In exchange, you pay me the $50,000 and forget I was ever involved in blackmailing your wife." "That's what Dalton offered you." "Yes, but Dalton's money comes with complications. Yours doesn't. Besides, I've read about your research, Dr. Woodruff. The treatment you're developing could actually help people. Dalton just wanted to profit from it. I may be a mercenary, but I'm not completely without principles." Gordon studied the investigator, weighing his options. Reeves was offering him everything he needed to destroy both Victoria and Dalton, evidence that would hold up in court, in divorce proceedings, in criminal trials if it came to that. $50,000 was a fraction of what his formula was worth, and a bargain for revenge. "I'll need everything," Gordon said. "Every photo, every document, every piece of evidence you've collected." "Done." Reeves extended his hand. "I'll have it all compiled and delivered by tomorrow morning. Encrypted drive, password protected. Once you confirm receipt, you transfer the money. After that, we never met." Gordon shook his hand, sealing a deal with a man he didn't trust but needed. As he drove home that night, his mind was already working through scenarios, planning his next moves with the same methodical precision he applied to his research. Victoria and Dalton had made the mistake of thinking him weak, thinking they could steal from him without consequences. They were about to learn otherwise. Friday morning, Gordon received the encrypted drive via courier. He spent his lunch hour in his locked office, reviewing every file Reeves had provided. The evidence was damning and comprehensive, enough to destroy both Victoria and Arnold Dalton several times over. But Gordon wasn't interested in simple destruction. He wanted them to understand exactly what they'd lost, what they'd thrown away for their greed and betrayal. By Friday evening, he had his plan. Gordon came home to find Victoria in the kitchen, her phone clutched in her white-knuckled grip. She'd been crying. Her eyes were red, mascara smudged, and she looked up at him with something close to panic when he entered. "Everything okay?" Gordon asked, keeping his voice gentle. "Fine," Victoria said quickly. "Just a stressful day." Gordon knew what had her rattled. Today was Reeves's deadline, and she hadn't paid. The investigator had texted her that morning. Gordon had a copy of every message, threatening to send everything to her husband by midnight if she didn't come through with the money. "You sure?" Gordon pressed. "You look upset." "I'm sure. I just need to lie down." Victoria fled upstairs, and Gordon heard their bedroom door close with more force than necessary. He pulled out his phone and sent a text to Reeves. "Change of plans. Don't send her anything. I'll handle it from here." The response came immediately. "Your money, your call. Good luck." Gordon then texted Raphael. "Tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. Conference room B. I need you as a witness." Raphael's response was simple. "I'll be there." The final text went to someone Gordon had never expected to contact. Sean Wagner, a corporate attorney who handled intellectual property cases for Meridian. Gordon had worked with him on patent applications and knew Wagner had a reputation for being absolutely ruthless in protecting the company's interests. "Need to discuss an urgent matter involving stolen research. Saturday morning, my office. Bring whatever you need for a criminal referral." Wagner's response took longer, but when it came, it was exactly what Gordon needed. "I'll bring everything." Saturday morning, Gordon arrived at Meridian's offices at 8 a.m. He spent the next 2 hours preparing, laying out evidence, organizing timelines, anticipating questions and objections. When Raphael arrived at 9:30, he found Gordon in the conference room surrounded by documents and looking more focused than he'd seen him in months. "You really doing this?" Raphael asked. "I am." "Good. They deserve everything that's coming." Sean Wagner arrived at exactly 10 a.m., carrying a leather briefcase and wearing the expression of a man who'd built his career on corporate warfare. Gordon spent 30 minutes walking him through everything: Victoria's affair, the theft, Dalton's pattern of behavior, Reeves's investigation. Wagner listened without interruption, occasionally making notes, his expression growing colder with each revelation. "This is actionable," Wagner said when Gordon finished, "both criminally and civilly. We can refer Victoria and Dalton to the FBI for corporate espionage. We can sue them both for damages. We can destroy them in every legal way possible." "I know," Gordon said, "but I want to do it strategically. I want maximum impact." Wagner smiled, and it wasn't pleasant. "Tell me what you're thinking." Gordon laid out his plan. It was elegant, devastating, and completely legal. It would cost Victoria and Dalton everything while protecting Gordon's research and ensuring it helped the patients who needed it. More importantly, it would make them face the consequences of their choices in the most public way possible. "It's perfect," Wagner said when Gordon finished. "Absolutely perfect. When do you want to execute?" "Monday morning. I want this done before they have a chance to regroup or hide assets." Wagner stood, gathering his notes. "I'll have everything ready." "Gordon, I'm sorry about your wife, but I'm glad you're fighting back." After Wagner left, Raphael remained, concern evident on his face. "You okay with all this? Once we start, there's no going back." Gordon thought about Victoria upstairs in their bedroom, crying over a situation of her own making. He thought about Arnold Dalton, who'd used and discarded women like they were disposable tools. He thought about his research, his life's work, almost stolen and buried to enrich people who'd contributed nothing to it. "I'm sure," Gordon said. "They made their choices. Now they live with the consequences." Monday morning began like any other. Gordon woke at 6, showered, dressed in his usual work clothes. Victoria was still asleep. She'd been avoiding him all weekend, claiming a migraine. He didn't bother waking her. At Meridian's offices, the trap was already set. Sean Wagner had worked through the weekend with the company's security team and legal department. Everything was in place. At 9 a.m., Gordon walked into the executive conference room, where Meridian CEO, chief legal officer, and head of security were waiting. He presented his evidence, all of it, in a 90-minute presentation that laid out Victoria and Dalton's conspiracy in excruciating detail. The executives listened with increasing fury, recognizing the scope of what had almost been stolen from them. "We're filing criminal charges today," the CEO said when Gordon finished. "Both against your wife and Dalton. We're also pursuing civil litigation for damages. We'll be seeking maximum penalties," Wagner added. "This is corporate espionage at its worst." At 11 a.m., FBI agents arrived at Victoria's office at Clearview Insurance. She was arrested at her desk, handcuffed in front of her colleagues, charged with theft of trade secrets and corporate espionage. The charges carried up to 10 years in prison and millions in fines. Simultaneously, other agents arrested Arnold Dalton at his home. They seized his computers, phones, and files, finding additional evidence of his previous schemes. The U.S. Attorney's Office, eager to make an example of corporate theft, announced they'd be seeking maximum sentences for both defendants. By noon, Gordon's phone was flooded with calls. Victoria's sister Kathy, demanding to know what was happening. Victoria's lawyer, looking for information. Reporters who'd gotten wind of the arrests and wanted comments. Gordon ignored them all. Instead, he went to lunch with Raphael, who raised his glass in a quiet toast. "To justice. To consequences," Gordon corrected. That evening, Gordon returned to an empty house. Victoria was in jail, unable to make bail because the charges were too serious and her assets had been frozen pending civil proceedings. He walked through rooms that felt different now, lighter, cleaner, like poison had been drained from them. His phone rang. "Sean Wagner." "Thought you'd want to know," Wagner said. "Dalton's attorney approached us about a plea deal. He's willing to testify against Victoria in exchange for a reduced sentence. He's also admitting to his previous thefts, which means additional charges and victims coming forward." "What about Victoria?" "Her attorney hasn't contacted us yet. I think she's still in shock." Wagner paused. "Gordon, you did the right thing. This formula you developed, it's going to help a lot of people. You protected that." After hanging up, Gordon went to his home office and opened his laptop. The grant proposal was still there, waiting for final revisions. He worked on it for 3 hours, making improvements, strengthening arguments, preparing for the next phase of research. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. He almost deleted it, then recognized the area code. It was from the county jail. "Please talk to me. I can explain. I'm so sorry. Victoria." Gordon stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. There was nothing she could say that would change what she'd done, no explanation that would justify her betrayal. She'd made her choice. Now she'd face the consequences. 3 months later, Gordon stood in a federal courthouse, watching as Victoria and Arnold Dalton were sentenced. Victoria had eventually pleaded guilty to all charges, hoping for leniency. She didn't get it. The judge sentenced her to 8 years in federal prison and ordered her to pay $3 million in restitution to Meridian Pharmaceuticals. Arnold Dalton, despite his cooperation and testimony against Victoria, received 12 years and a $5 million judgment. The judge specifically noted his pattern of predatory behavior and called him a threat to corporate integrity and the advancement of scientific research. As they were led away in handcuffs, Victoria looked back at Gordon one last time. Her expression was complicated: regret, anger, desperation, but Gordon felt nothing. She was a stranger now, someone he'd once thought he knew but never really had. Outside the courthouse, reporters clustered around Gordon, shouting questions. He gave them nothing, pushing through to where Raphael waited with the car. "How do you feel?" Raphael asked as they drove away. Gordon considered the question. His marriage was over, destroyed by betrayal. But his research was secure, moving forward into clinical trials that showed promising results. Patients who suffered from degenerative nerve conditions would benefit from his work. Victoria and Dalton were in prison where they belonged. Darryl Reeves had his money and disappeared back into whatever shadows he inhabited. "I feel free," Gordon said finally. "Like I've been carrying something heavy and finally set it down." "What's next?" "The same thing that's always been next. The work." Gordon looked out the window at the city passing by, at the life he'd rebuilt from the wreckage of his marriage. "The research is entering phase 3 trials next month. If the results hold, we could have FDA approval within 2 years. You're going to change people's lives?" Raphael said. That was always the goal. Victoria and Dalton just tried to steal it for profit. Gordon smiled, and it was genuine. They failed. I made sure of that. That evening, Gordon returned to the house that was now simply his. He'd already filed for divorce, uncontested given Victoria's imprisonment and admitted infidelity. The house would be sold and the proceeds split, though Victoria's share would go directly toward her restitution payments. He made dinner, read journals, worked on research notes. His life had returned to its rhythms, simpler now without the complication of a partner he couldn't trust. Some might call it lonely. Gordon called it peaceful. His phone buzzed with an email notification. The grant committee had approved his proposal with full funding. The next phase of research would begin immediately, with expanded resources and support. Everything he'd worked toward was falling into place. Gordon raised his glass of wine to the empty room. To consequences, he said softly, echoing his earlier toast with Raphael. And to justice. The house was quiet around him, but it was the quiet of possibility, of a future unburdened by betrayal. Gordon had learned the hardest lesson, that the people closest to you could hurt you most deeply. But he'd also learned his own strength, his capacity to face betrayal and emerge on the other side, not as a victim, but as someone who'd chosen to fight back. Victoria and Dalton had thought him weak, thought they could use him and discard him when convenient. They'd been catastrophically wrong. Gordon had proven himself smarter, stronger, and far more ruthless than they'd imagined. He'd protected his work, destroyed his enemies, and moved forward with his life. In the end, that was the victory that mattered most.